I know fantasy is supposed to be fun, lighthearted, and whimsical, but I've always preferred it a little darker, with a nice touch of realism and just a bit of suffering sprinkled in for good measure. I really do believe that realism is very important in fantasy stories, so much so that I've made a couple of videos on Isekai and fantasy anime that I think do a really good job at blending fantasy with realism. So, naturally, when people started yelling at me because I use Grimgar clips while talking about basic and terrible Isekai series, saying stuff like, "Why would you do that? Grimgar is actually the best and most realistic Isekai to exist," I knew I had to sit down and see for myself to find out if it really is as good as you guys say it is, but to also answer the question, is Grimgar really the most realistic Isekai to exist? It really comes down to two things on why I think realism in fantasy is important. The first being world building. Having some realism in your world building not only helps with the lore, but it also helps make the world feel like people could actually live in it and that it could actually exist by having logic and rules that explain why things happen, because this also just helps the plot move along in such a way that makes sense and it doesn't make things feel like they're happening because the plot needs it to happen. The second thing, of course, is the characters. When a fantasy is a bit more realistic, you get more complex and nuanced characters instead of a generic looking guy with black hair that is definitely on some sort of watch list because of his internet search history. And I'd say Grimgar does both of these things pretty well. The story starts by introducing us to the most mid-2000s dressed anime characters I have ever seen. They've just woken up in Grimgar and they have absolutely no idea what's going on, and worst of all, they have no memories from their previous lives, so they're off to a strong start. They're then immediately introduced to this totally trustworthy and normal looking guy who tells them, "Hey, you guys should become volunteer soldiers," which is basically just monster hunters, since they have absolutely no money to their name, and it would be nice to afford things like a roof over their head and food. Being a volunteer soldier also grants them certain benefits, like a really good dental plan and healthcare, I think. The only downside is that they might be killed by a monster, but what's worse, getting killed or being poor? So, these amnesia patients weigh that and they go, "Yeah, it sounds like a good deal to me." This bigger group then splits up and we follow our heroes group, a group that struggles a little bit. Now, what I thought was going to happen were these guys were going to suck for like an episode or two, but then start to really get the hang of it and become monster killing machines. But, that's not what happens, because these guys suck. I mean, they really fucking suck. It takes all 6 of them to kill one goblin. And every time you think they've killed the goblin, it gets up and starts to run away. And it just got to the point that I was like, just put it out of its misery already. Thank you. That is so much better. Where was I? These guys aren't adventurers, they're definitely not knights, and they really aren't heroes. They are just normal-ass people who have been thrust into killing monsters, and the story reminds you of that every single chance it can get. Each of these characters feel like real people, with real problems. Our hero feels like he's not doing enough to help the party out. This girl has really bad anxiety. This guy's personality is just really abrasive, and he overall just fucking sucks. This girl's ass is just really fat. As you can imagine, they don't really vibe together that well, and they probably wouldn't have hung out with each other in their previous lives, but that's where this series' greatest strength comes in. The quiet moments between the monster hunting. We slowly see them bond on shopping trips, during dinner, or them just hanging out with each other after a hard day's work at the tavern. As they become friends, their teamwork starts to improve. They start to hunt goblins more efficiently, and even though there is an overlooming stress that they aren't making enough money, they stay in high spirits, and it does feel like everything is going to be no. Okay, I might have started to speak a little too soon here. We really don't see this a lot in fantasy anime and isekai in general. We don't see a party be built from the ground up. A lot of times we either start in the middle of them already being great adventurers together, or they just mesh well off the bat. And after losing their party leader, we see them get a concrete goal. These guys are not gonna kill the Demon King. They aren't going to save the world. They're just trying to avenge their friend. It can't get any more realistic or grounded than this. But there were some things that really bugged me that I also think were very unrealistic. Like, why is nobody training? You guys are constantly getting your asses kicked. You're complaining about it. You're going hungry. Simply do a couple push-ups, do some sit-ups, swing the sword, practice your sword play, do something. It didn't make sense to me why they weren't training. The main character's guild leader even calls him out on that, saying, hey, you should probably like do a push-up or two to get in shape. I'm like, okay, so it's just these goobers being fucking stupid or something. But then at the same time, they have to pay their guilds to learn skills. And I would understand, like, okay, the mage and the priest have to pay, for spells. That makes sense to me. And maybe the knights have to pay to learn some secret hidden technique that they don't know about. But no, I shit you not, they're learning stuff like slash your sword diagonally, thrust your sword forward. You can dodge backwards by jumping. What? That not only sounds like a waste of money, but you're telling me they can't think of slashing their sword in a different direction on their own? They have to pay somebody to learn that? That just didn't make sense to me. And both of these things affect combat negatively in my eyes because yes, I understand that they're a party. The whole point is them working together, but there are literal moments where the main character, who is supposed to be a thief, his whole thing is sneaking, can run into an enemy who is sleeping. He could easily just sneak up and slice that enemy's throat without anybody's help, but he'll go back, get everybody else to then jump this one goblin. It becomes a whole thing, and I'm just like, it was asleep. He couldn't have just walked up and slit his throat. Does he need a slit throat skill? It just didn't make sense. And because they're out of shape, they'll be hunting goblins for what feels like maybe an hour. And then they just go, we should just head back because we're tired. We only worked for an hour, but man, it's cold and I'm tired and we're out of shape. I thought you guys had money problems. I thought you guys weren't going to be able to afford dinner tonight. So we're just throwing in the towel? We're not going to just try and put in a little bit overtime here? Okay. Makes sense, I guess. But their money problem in general doesn't make a lot of sense to me either, though. Yes, I understand that they're struggling for money. So why don't they get side jobs? After their leader's death, dickhead over here says that he's going to quit and will do something else. And the main character throws in his face, what else are you going to do? We became volunteer soldiers because there was nothing else we could do. Who decided that? You're telling me none of you can mop? You guys can't lift crates? I know one of you can cook. No one's hiring part-timers. Nobody has busy work for you guys to do to get just a little bit of side money. Like, I imagine that the light novels and manga probably explain this a lot better than the anime, but the anime really did not explain why they can't go and get side jobs to pay for the stuff they need. And I know it can't be something like, oh, well, they don't remember any of their skills from their past life, because this motherfucker's over here carving really detailed and good quality sculptures. So that tells me that even though they don't remember their skills, they have some sort of muscle memory that allows them to do it. And what's even more irritating about that is that they even acknowledge, like, hey, you should sell those. You could probably get a lot of money for those. And he's like, nah, I just do it for fun. You are starving. Some of you can't afford underwear. What do you mean you're not gonna sell them because you only do it for fun? That's like being stranded in the desert and you haven't drank water in days and you stumble upon a Dasani water bottle and you decide not to drink it because it's Dasani, which honestly is very understandable, but this is the principle, okay? Sell the carvings. So is this the most realistic isekai? Nah, not really. When it comes to the emotional realism, yeah, I feel for the characters, I can relate to them, and because the story focuses more on them and growing as a party and not them saving the world or killing some big bad, it does do a good job at taking its time and showing us how they grow as people, especially during the tragedy of them losing one of their friends. Which is why I found it so strange that, like, so many people's criticism of this series was it's slow. You're telling me 5 minutes in, you couldn't tell that this series was going to have a slower pace? It wasn't going to have high octane action? Really? Okay. It really is just those mistakes that I noticed that I think hinder this series and making it the most realistic isekai to exist, because most of the world building is actually really good. They drop lore naturally in conversation, like why there is volunteer soldiers. They basically just say, oh, the soldiers are on the front line. They don't explain why they are, but there aren't enough soldiers to actually hunt monsters, so volunteer soldiers were made to do that. It's pretty good. And that is consistent throughout the series. And because the characters basically have retrograde amnesia and know absolutely nothing about this world, it makes sense why people explain things to them. But again, they don't explain it to them like they're 5-year-olds. They basically just drop it naturally in conversation. Do I think any of the flaws that I pointed out make this a bad series? No, No, I still think this is a really good series. I do think despite its flaws, it does still do a good job at blending realism with fantasy. It just could have did a better job at explaining some things. But also the art is just very pretty. It reminds me of like Octopath Traveler and like Kazuo Takahashi's work from Final Fantasy. It's really pretty. If you are looking for a more grounded and slow-paced fantasy story, I do recommend Grimgar. Honestly, I can't wait to watch season 2. Oh, fuck, really? Yeah, so from what I can tell from what I found online, they only made one season to promote the light novel, which does suck, yeah, but the anime does have a decent stopping point where if you really wanted that to be the ending, you could stop there, but I have a lot of questions I want answers to, so I'm gonna have to read a book. Ugh, man. Wait! Don't click off yet, okay? I know a lot of you guys click off at this point, but give me a couple more seconds of your time, okay? I just want to say thank you for 10,000 subscribers. As I'm recording this, I think I'm at 11,000, but I want to thank you for 10,000 subscribers. I'm incredibly proud of the community that we have built. I love reading you guys' comments. I love replying to you guys. I love to see the discussions that you guys have, and I hope that we can continue to build such an awesome community. Okay, now that all that mushy gushy stuff is out of the way, go watch the video that inspired this one. It's a really, really good video. All right, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.